Hello everyone, welcome to Star Psych, and today I want to talk about the idea of flow or flow state. And if you don't know exactly what it is, being in a flow state or being in flow is kind of when your mind and body are in unison when you're working towards something. And it allows you to kind of be your best self, and it's this marriage of mind and body when you're working towards something. And I want to talk about how we can enter flow state and how flow state can interact with us as individuals and our personality. Let's get into it. In positive psychology, which is a branch of psychology that focuses on kind of positive human elements, flow is described as where skill level meets difficulty in the perfect way, which is to say that when you're working towards a task that is meaningful to you, and it's something that you are prepared and skilled enough to do, but is also still challenging to you, you're going to find yourself likely to enter this kind of flow state. And what this essentially means is that your mind and body are working together in unison towards this task, and because it's just the right level of difficulty for you, it allows you to engage in it fully. Your mind becomes dedicated to this task. Now, flow state can appear in different people in different ways, which is to say that not everyone's going to have the same style of flow state. For some people, they can have very competitive flow states where they find themselves engaged and interactive when they're working on something that's challenging them severely. Some people find calming flow states, which is when they're working on something that they do frequently and it's something that they enjoy. This could be an activity, something even as simple as like knitting. These are the types of things that can allow us to engage in this flow state. But what happens when we enter this state is we really just have this kind of unified mental experience where we allow ourselves to fully dedicate our mind and body to the task at hand. And it becomes something that is very energizing for a lot of people because we enter this state, which is not something we can usually normally access. We can't consciously put ourselves into flow state, which is why it requires that difficulty component in some sense. If something is too easy for you, it's not going to cause your mind to become actively engaged with it. Then you're just going to be kind of bored and going through the motions when you're doing a task. Which is why someone who is skilled at a task, overly skilled at a task, might find themselves bored or stressed at times because they can no longer enter a flow state. They have to continuously find a new level to push themselves to if they want to reach some sort of flow state. EEG brain reading studies have shown that when participants are given tasks with different difficulties that match their interests, that the mind is actually functioning at its best when it can enter this kind of flow state. So for example, when participants were given one of 3 different categories of difficulty relating to tasks, easy, medium, or very hard or beyond their normal skill level, they found that participants' minds were the most engaged when they were in the moderate difficulty level of difficulty for them as an individual. Now, this is subjective, and that's why flow state becomes difficult to kind of enter for different people, and not everyone's going to have the same approach to entering flow state, because someone else's easy could be your hard, and someone else's hard could be your easy. But what they found was that when participants were when they were in these states where they were doing something that was of moderate difficulty to them, and it was interesting, that their brains were the most engaged in these activities. So say, for example, they were performing a task, they would find that as long as the cognitive load on their working memory specifically was not being too high, then they would perform their best and be the most invested in this activity. And that's when we find ourselves in that kind of flow state, when we can find that we're not thinking too hard about the activity that we're doing. We're not forcing our brains to stress and try to solve problems, but we have this kind of intuitive understanding of what it is that we're working with, but it's challenging us just enough to keep us interested and invested. Personally, my flow state usually comes when I am engaging in some sort of competition or something that involves my mind against someone else or my skill against someone else. Now, I'm not a terribly competitive person, but I find that this is actually the thing that kind of excites me when I'm challenging someone or even something. It doesn't even have to be a person. When I'm challenging something and I'm fully invested in this challenge. So, for example, I play a lot of video games, and I used to travel to compete in fighting games, like 1-versus-1 games, Soul Calibur, Street Fighter, these types of things. I used to go and compete. And I would find that I would most often enter my flow state when I'm playing these types of games, and I am competing against someone of a similar skill level. Now, what's interesting here is when we're talking about things being of a similar skill level, there's also this, the idea that we grow the most when we are within our means of growth, when we are within the level of growth for us as individuals. Which is to say that if you're competing above your skill level, or you're trying to learn with someone who is too far ahead of you, who is not directly teaching you, you're going to learn much slower than if you were competing competing against people who are within your own skill level. And this is kind of alongside the idea that flow state is when our mind is in its most optimal state for learning or engaging in something. Because when we're engaging in something that's the right level of difficulty, we can fully engage ourselves, and our mind is going to work harder to remember the things that we are working with. So say, for example, one time I bought a new fighting game, and I distinctly remember this because it was quite interesting to me at the time. I bought a new fighting game, and I immediately jumped into online mode, and I came across this guy who had like a 90% win rate, and he floored me for like 40 matches straight. And then I learned after that pretty quickly that I didn't learn anything from those matches. The guy just putting me into the ground 40 matches in a row because he'd been playing for 2 years and I just bought the game wasn't teaching me anything. But what I did find, though, was that if I jumped on to another match where I was fighting people of similar skill level and learning within my own means as an individual, then my mind became much more engaged in the learning process. I wasn't trying to fight this ridiculous uphill battle where I'm not going to be able to enter a flow state and not going to be fully engaging in the activity, and I was able to actually take in more information and use it. And that's the right kind of positioning for the mind for flow state. Find that middle ground between what is boring or easy to you and what is overly difficult and nearly impossible for you. The subjective experience of how flow state feels is going to also vary from person to person. So for example, my flow state is initiated by competitive things. So for example, when I'm in those fighting game tournaments, I tend to enter my flow state because of the competitive nature of them. It's challenging to me. But some people don't enter their flow state when they're doing things that are inherently competitive. Some people enter when they're doing things that are more calming to them. They have a calm initiated flow state. I think a great example of this would be painters. A lot of painters will enter a flow state where their mind is fully optimized when they're painting something that is meaningful to them. So it doesn't have to be the same for every person. Now, last week I asked in the community section how you all subjectively experience flow state, and I'm going to read a few of those here in a second. But first I wanted to say how it feels to me to be in a flow state and how that specifically relates to the activities for me that initiate that flow state. So as I mentioned earlier, fighting games are very important to me. I like to compete and be involved in things that are difficult to me. I like to be involved with challenge. Challenge is exciting to me. And I find that my flow state puts me in a state of mind where I'm predicting things without any type of anxiety related to that prediction. So for example, the example you might relate this to is the old kind of Kung Fu Man in the old, action movies where he has such a read on his opponent that he's not even worried. He's just deflecting the blows left and right. To me, that's kind of what my flow state feels like. It feels like I'm in this state where I can actively read my opponent and I'm not anxious or worried about it. I'm almost confident, but not too confident because I realize that there's still a threat there. It's a perfect match of skill versus opportunity versus the challenge. It's all these things combined into one perfect element that create a flow state for me where I can predict things and other people's and activities, and I'm often excited and energized by being able to enter this predictive state. That's how my flow state is personally. When I asked people to leave their description of how their flow state is, I also asked them about their Myers-Briggs type. Now, this video isn't about personality type, but I thought it might be interesting to relate personality type to flow state, just to see if there was any correlations there. So I'm going to just kind of casually go down the comment section here and read off a few of the comments that were left. So let's see. Lucas David Muzel says, it's like a perfect blend between seriousness and playfulness. It happens sometimes when I'm improvising on the guitar. I am an INTJ. Tom Vinharo says, INTJ here. It feels like my train of thought is completely smooth. I reach conclusions faster, generally become more creative, and any worries I have fade away. It feels like some sort of trance state in some sense. Dark Kion, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, says, improvising on piano, playing by only my emotions and intuition at the moment is one of the greatest feelings. INTJ. Anne says, I am an INTJ. When I experience this state, it feels like I am in total control. I am the puppet master, not controlling others but my own behavior, and because of that, I control my own situation. It doesn't feel forced. I feel playful, everything feels easy and relaxed, and I know what to do without having to think about it. And INFP Magdalena Simrak says, flow is for me like being above my body when I play music, or something like being tuned to the perfect frequency of the universe. Every note sounds perfectly as I imagined without controlling too much. I would say that practicing a lot and then giving up control could be one of the keys in reaching flow and music performance, but still it is a mystery because one day I can have it without trying, and another day it is like the opposite of flow. Queen's Gambit describes their flow state as tunnel vision without the anxiety. Armin Jamak says, ENTP here, flow is when there's a complete lack of blockage, observer and observed become one, and at each moment you perceive reality, therefore truth, unfiltered. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to read every single one of those responses, but if you'd like to read all the responses that people left, you can go check out where I posted the question in the community tab on my channel, and you can see all the responses that people left about their subjective flow state experience. Now, I would like to know down in the comment section below, if you just saw this video without seeing that question, how do you experience flow state? What is flow state like for you? Is it something that's easy to access? And when you are doing things, what is it that you are doing that allows you to enter this flow state? Flow state is interesting because it's one of those things that when we go looking for it, we often find that we're unable to get there because it's something that requires that true immersion in the activity that we're doing. So it's hard to kind of force ourselves to go into some sort of flow state. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I would like to remind everybody that I do have personality typing sessions available at my website, asurapsych.com, if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been Asura at Asura Psych. Have a good one.